In this video, I want to talk to you about the consumer revenue models for pricing for merchant services. These programs are often called cash discounting, surcharging, non-cash adjustment. Excuse me. You'll see things like convenience fees and things like that. All of these programs, we've all experienced these, whether it's reaching out to our utility company to pay our utility bill with our card, and they say, well, if you're going to pay with your card, there's a $5 fee, a convenience fee that we charge, right? You may even start to see it out in the market where you're at. You'll see merchants that'll say, hey, if you use your card, it's going to cost you an extra 50 cents or an extra 3 or 4%. These programs are really becoming more and more prevalent. Now, in other modules, we can talk more about the good and bad of the programs and really how to structure them correctly. But in this module, I really just want to focus on what are these programs, how do they actually work, and how do you make sure with these programs, how do you understand the margin and what the processor is making. So let's back up for just a second and kind of understand what's happening here. So what's happening is that business owners for decades now, as we talked about in the module on in the introduction to credit card processing, for decades now, business owners have been the ones that are paying the fees in order to process the credit and debit card transactions, okay? And obviously, business owners many times do not enjoy paying those fees. So even though you go in and say, well, you're paying $400, with us, you could pay $300. To the merchant, they're like, well, I'm still paying $300. And so there definitely is a movement among merchants right now where they're looking at alternatives. Is there a way for me to not pay the $300 at all? What if I didn't want to pay anything to process credit card and debit card transactions? Well, there's only two ways they could do that. Number one, they could just stop accepting. So they could go to a cash-only store. Well, that's a really, really bad idea as a general rule because business owners, they don't really, they need to be able to accept these forms of payment. And we talked a lot about that in the introduction to credit card processing because accepting these forms of payment, the average business, when they look at their transactions, the credit and debit card transactions are usually 20 to 40% higher average ticket than the cash transactions. In other words, when people come in, when the same person comes in and uses their card versus cash, they spend more when they use their card. And so they really want people to be able to use the card, but they don't want to pay a lot of fees to do that. So the other way to solve the problem, if you're not going to go to cash only, would be to have the customer pay to be able to use their card, right? Now, there's several different ways this is structured. The first way it's structured is a surcharge program. A surcharge program is a program that is something that was part of a settlement that Visa had with merchants quite a few years back. And the idea of a surcharge program is that you can add a fee onto a transaction when someone uses their credit card. Now, a surcharge program, you actually can't do anything with a debit card. Signature debit or PIN debit doesn't matter. You can't add a fee there. You're not allowed to with the Visa rules. But Visa rules does allow a merchant to add a surcharge onto a credit card transaction. So, well, here's what happens. Let's say that we have a merchant that's currently processing $10,000 a month, and let's say that they're paying $350 a month in fees. So they're paying $350, 3.5% effective rate. So what will happen with these programs is that they'll implement a surcharge. They'll say, okay, whenever somebody uses their credit card in our business, we are going to charge them 4%, right? So we're going to add 4% onto that transaction. So if I go into that business and I spend $100, they're actually going to collect $104 from me because of that 4%. And they're going to use that $4 to offset the cost of my credit card transactions. Now, I still have to pay my debit card fees, okay? So I still have to pay those. I can't get around that with the surcharge program. But I'm now offsetting my credit card. So maybe I go from paying $350 a month. Maybe I'm able to collect enough revenue from my customers using credit cards that I'm able to offset a couple $100, and maybe now I'm only paying $150. So I'm going from $350 to $150 because maybe I was able to collect $200 in fees that I was able to apply to the fees that I would pay for credit card processing. That's a surcharge program, okay? A sister program to that would be the idea of a cash discount program, okay? So a cash discount program is one where we're actually raising the regular price of everything in the store. And that can be done many different ways. It can be done with a sign that informs people at the door and at the point of sale that the regular price has been increased. It could be actually changing the prices on the shelves and increasing the price on the shelf. But the idea is it's a price increase where we're taking the price up a little bit. And again, people aren't really good at, consumers don't really notice that too much. Then we're going to offer a cash discount. So we raise the regular price on everything. Now, if you pay with cash, you're going to get a discount. So these programs are really interesting because now we're actually able to do really the same thing as the surcharge in a way, but we're able to get around the Visa restriction of not doing it on debit. So now we can collect, the merchant can collect that extra bit of revenue from their customers if it's done correctly and in a compliant way. They can collect that money from their customers, and then they can use that money to pay all of the processing fees. And of course, this is all facilitated by the processing company that's setting it all up, setting the terminal up, making sure everything works correctly. Okay? Then the other program here is the non-cash adjustment program. So a non-cash adjustment program, or what I call an in-kind incentive program, stems from something called the Durbin Amendment. And so the Durbin Amendment actually gives merchants the right to say, hey, if you want to incentivize people to pay with cash, you can do that by implementing a fee to incentivize people to pay with cash. So you have an extra fee when people don't pay with cash. So it's a non-cash adjustment. So you're going to see programs like that as well. And so again, all these programs are accomplishing really the same thing, and that is we're trying to collect a little bit of extra revenue from each consumer when they use their card. Then we're taking that money and we're using that to pay the credit card processing fees. Now, they do that in different ways. The surcharge is one thing. It's very simple. We're adding a fee to all the credit card transactions, compliant with Visa rules, and we're adding that. We have to make sure that there's in compliance with several different things, which is why you really have to have the processor set that up. That's not something a merchant could do on their own. Really, none of these programs are something a merchant should ever do on their own. It's just not going to be compliant in the way they implement it. So we have the surcharge. Then we have the cash discount, where we're increasing the regular price. We're offering a cash discount at the counter. Then we have non-cash adjustment programs, where we're doing an in-kind incentive sanctioned by the Durbin Amendment, where we are, as long as we're in compliance with that Durbin Amendment, we're adding an incentive for people to pay with cash. All of those, though, net effect basically the same, where you're collecting money from the consumer and you're using that money to offset the fees for credit card processing. Now, these programs have very high margins because you're generally pricing these transactions a little bit higher. So usually they're at some kind of, maybe the merchant maybe is at a 4% flat rate, 3.99% flat rate, and you're collecting that 3.99% from the consumer. So they're at a higher flat rate, and so the margins can be a little bit higher. But you also have to be careful, because when we get lower average ticket sizes, where it's like maybe a $5 average ticket, like the hot dog stand I mentioned in a previous video, now if we're only collecting 4%, that's not enough. It's going to cost them 5 or 6% in interchange fees. So now we are only collecting a little bit of revenue and we have a higher cost, right? So there's different things we can do there. We could implement a per item non-cash adjustment. So we might say there's going to be a 50-cent fee, when you don't pay with cash. So we can do different things like that to incentivize. And there's a lot of different programs like that out there. But the key concept here to understand is that there is this other idea, this other way of structuring payments, where you're getting the consumer to collect a small amount from each transaction from the consumer and use that to offset the cost of processing. There you go. There's all the cost structures in the industry. That's kind of a big picture overview. What we're going to do is we're going to dive into another module here on how to read a processing statement. That's kind of step 2. Take all these concepts and let's see what all these pricing structures and all these ideas actually look like on a statement.